Yeah, so our models are wrong. And so we are trying to respond to our models being wrong. And one of our techniques for this is information gathering, right? And so we see Bruce working his way up the tree of information gathering techniques, right? His initial response is to like get down on ground level, like you said, get more granular. Try to find individual facts and see if they match up to your understanding of what's happening at street level. His second response is he runs some experiments. How do people react? Like let's start to control the narrative a little bit. Let's start to do some, instigate some changes of our own and see if we can get a little bit more better understanding of how the system is working, about how people are responding, about what our opponents are doing in this case, right? The next thing that he does, though, is he zooms out. He's starting to look for larger patterns. Once he has a sense of what the granular patterns look like, now he's zooming back out, right? He's gone from granular to super big picture. So tell us about how he does this.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the movie, when he travels to Hong Kong to intercept Lau, we see them use this technology. They plant the cell phone inside of the business, and then they use it to create this sonar mapping of the building that they're in. So we see him scale this technology up later in the movie, where they're basically creating these sonar maps of Gotham using all this data that they're stealing from people's cell phones. And by they, I mean Batman is doing this, right? He seems to be doing this as a lone actor.
Unilaterally, yes.
Yeah, he's doing this unilaterally in classic Batman fashion. So he now has the ability to see where everybody is at and how they are moving over time, which is giving him a level of advantage that he didn't previously have. And of course, he knows that this is a bad idea. Obviously, he knows this is something that would get him in jail, and this is something that would not be thought of well by the public. So not only does he build this system, but he, in this scene, shares that he's built this system with Lucius Fox, the technology director, Morgan Freeman.
The Q branch of the Batman universe.
Yeah, exactly. So he shares this technology with Lucius, and when he does, Lucius is like, no, we can't. This is not a good idea. This breaks so many laws and breaks the trust of the public. But he's already thought about this, Bruce has. It's like, that's exactly why I trusted it to the most moral person that I know. I needed to give it to the most high character person I know. So this is linked to you, Lucius. And when we're done, you're going to type in your name and the whole program is going to be deleted. He basically brings in this super net for information capture in order to overcome the Joker's chaos strategy or chaos narrative that he has in place. And then he's going to wipe it away from the world so that it never sees the light of daylight.
Can't be used, right. So yeah, so there's a couple things that I like about this. Like I said, I like that it completes the arc of the information gathering. Like, he starts granular and then he starts running local experiments. And then once he's run some local experiments and thinks he understands how things are going, then he zooms out. It's like, okay, now I'm going to look for the Joker's voice and I'm going to use this pattern recognition to help orient myself. So I like that as a basic articulation of a strategy when you think your models aren't working. But I think the way he interacts with Lucius is also a good example of, he recognizes it's not like I'm wrong about everything, nothing is trustworthy, right? And we'll talk about that in the next episode because that's kind of how Harvey reacts.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce doesn't go that far. He doesn't like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Everything is terrible and no one is trustworthy. Everybody's evil. The world is messed up, right? He doesn't do that. He recognizes like, these are the categories of things that I don't understand, that are the problems that I'm trying to solve. And these are the categories of things that are still reliable. And those categories of things are mostly people that he trusts, right? Like he trusts Gordon, he trusts Rachel, and he trusts Lucius, right? And so he has this thing which is kind of powerful, but also scary. And what he does is he entrusts the person that he has seen over and over again behave in a responsible way. He entrusts that person with control of it, right? And for a limited time. He's also, yes, and I'm also going to get rid of this. Hi, Freddie.
Yes, Freddie is here now.
Hi, Freddie. Freddie has joined the pod, ladies and gentlemen, the
Hey,
Wonder
Freddie.
Tour podcast dog.
No, okay, so I like what you're saying. We're not going to get into the morality of should we create an all-seeing eye that can capture all of this stuff, but instead it's the idea that, like you said, getting the different levels of information and discerning the patterns and then applying the patterns kind of across the levels from the lowest possible level and then seeing if it scales up to the narrative level at the top. And what he's able to do with this is he's able to overcome a little bit of the chaos that Joker is throwing at him, because at least he isn't behind in terms of where Joker is at and what Joker is doing. He, despite the fact that he doesn't know why, or he doesn't know what the next thing is, he at least knows what's currently happening with him, which would have helped him to avoid things like the Joker seeing Harvey in the hospital, or the Joker blowing up the hospital, for example.
Yeah, right. And so getting the more information. But what we see in the back half of the movie then is not that he's like, okay, now I've got the all-seeing eye, I can step back and pull the strings from behind the scenes. Like, no, he still wants to go back to ground level. He still wants to go personally intervene. He still wants to understand the facts for himself. He's still like, the police all think that the bad guys are in this building and they're going to start shooting them. And he's like, we're going to go check on that. And everything in this movie is misdirection. So it turns out that people in clown masks are hostages and the people in doctor suits are bad guys. Like, very comic book. But the fact that he's like, he doesn't give himself permission to stay divorced from the ground level. Like, he uses the high level information as context, but then he like goes and does stuff personally. It's a difficult balancing act. We always talk about this on Wonder Tour, right? The hardest lesson for the leader to learn is that it's not about you. Right? It's not about what you want. Bruce spends a lot of time worrying about what he wants and about his reputation, about whether he should take the mask off and what's going to happen to him with Rachel. Like, he spends a lot of time having angst about himself in this movie. And it takes him a little while to get to the point where it's clearly not about him, but it's really not. Like, he's taking personal responsibility to do things, but he's not doing it for himself. I'm not going to control this technology. I'm not trying to be in charge. I'm not responsible to even have everybody like me. I'm just trying to make things go better.
Exactly. He's trying to empower other people to make the right decisions and do the right things while paying as much of the cost as he can possibly pay himself. So that is exactly what makes Batman great. And that's really what makes any leader great, is the willingness to give freedom to the people that work for and with them, to allow them to make their own decisions while encouraging them through their own actions and the light that shines, basically, as well as through the tools that they give and these things to make better decisions and to operate, better within their given environment. But then he also is down there at the ground level with the boots on, making sure that if somebody needs to pick up trash, he's going to be there to pick up trash. If somebody's going to get punched in the face, he's going to be willing to be the one to get punched in the face. He's not expecting Lucius to be that person.
Right. He does display really good skill at deciding who to trust. He displays really good skill at like recognizing where, the reason he's getting frustrated and these things aren't working is because he doesn't understand what's actually going on and trying to address that. Like, he's just going after it and going after it and going after it and keep trying. Right. And so I think in the next episode, we're going to talk a lot about his persistence. We're going to talk a lot about that commitment. But this one is more about his tactics. Right? How does he position himself to understand what's going on, and how does he position other people to potentially succeed in that environment?
This is honestly, a common situation the more I think about it, where you don't necessarily have a nice prisoner's dilemma, right? We don't necessarily have two boats and each one has a trigger on it. And if one blows the other one up, right? Or one clicks it, then they'll blow the other one up. Or if no one clicks it, then they both survive. We don't necessarily have that sort of situation. How do we apply this, right? How do we apply this to our normal situations? Because most of the times that we go to apply strategy and tactics, it's not as simple as find the game theory model and apply it. So we need a little bit of a framework that can help us to navigate that.
Right. Yeah, and I think for me, that the thing that I observed in this movie that I liked was this idea of balancing, like, go and see for yourself with then like zoom out and try to understand, and back and forth, trying to balance those two modes of recalibrating your understanding of what the heck is actually going on. Where are we failing at a ground level? Like, which facts do we have that are wrong, or which assumptions do we have that are wrong? But then at a bigger level, okay, great. How does that all stitch together? How does that turn into a narrative? How does that turn into something that we can understand how to act?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we see here then is that Joker is kind of playing on a different level. And this is a common situation that we can find ourselves in. We can get lost in the weeds and the details and the data inputs and the process and lose sight of the narrative. And that is probably one of the most common, honestly, it might be the most common way to muck up strategy is to get too lost in the mechanical aspects of things and like, well, if we do this, then we have to do this, and that these constraints apply here, and so we must do this. Versus Joker, not saying that anything that Joker does is really admirable, but what makes him so successful is he's hyper fixated on a narrative in his head of how things are going to go, that Batman is going to be broken, that Harvey is going to be broken, and that he doesn't need all the minutia, right? His guardrails are, well, in some ways his guardrails are non-existent, and in other ways his guardrails are whatever tools he has access to at the moment that he's going to use to move the narrative forward. And while that's no way to run a large business necessarily, we can definitely learn things from that.
Definitely disrupt things with that. Well, and the example that he has, right, is he tells multiple versions of his own origin story. Like, he just loves the stories. Like, they don't even have to be the same stories. He has no obligation to be consistent at all, right? And so that's I think you're right, that he has a strong flair for narrative, even if it's not founded on anything at all. And that's definitely a failure mode, right? If you're very attached to your game theory, if you're very attached to the details of your strategy and your system and the probabilities and how things are going to work out, not only can you lose sight of it, but that's not very sexy. You can have that. That's great. It's very powerful to figure out how to manage, but that's not going to inspire large numbers of people to change their behavior, right? Like, the thing that's going to inspire large numbers of people to change their behavior is a compelling narrative. And so that's a big part of the arc that we see in this movie is, we start with the compelling narrative of Harvey Dent, the White Knight, who's going to save Gotham. Right. And that turns out not to be a robust enough narrative. Right. Nobody can live up to that. Not even Harvey Dent can live up to that. But the really seductive narrative of, everything is just irretrievably screwed up and all of the people are inherently bad and selfish. That's a tempting narrative. And you can't fight that with like, but I'm more selfish and I punch harder. Right. You have to fight that with like, no, actually, you're wrong about people. And we have to provide some examples.
There you go. I love that, right? Because that is exactly what he does. He doubles down on his own one rule. He's not going to kill people. He's not going to give up on the mission. He's not going to give up on the people of Gotham, even if the people of Gotham turn on him.
Right.
He has this strong belief that hope is going to win out, and that if he doesn't show people that hope is possible at the darkest night, then nobody is going to.
Right. And then maybe that's it. Maybe that's where we land, right? There are some great practical tactics in here about how to work in the face of a failing model, right? How to approach information gathering, how to approach improving your understanding of the world. But that's only really step one. That gets you to the point where you can see the world in the cool 3D animation. Like, that doesn't get anybody to follow you. That doesn't change the world. That just lets you see it. Right. Which, okay, great. Enlightenment is the first step. Right. But then you have to go do some things. And those things have to be consistent with the narrative. They have to be consistent with your philosophy. They have to be consistent with the character that you're trying to demonstrate to the world, because that's what you're trying to incubate in others.
No, that's really good. It really led us through this entire episode to the point where we came to the conclusion that, yes, all these tactics that we talked about are good, and I will and do use them. But really, the most important one is to zoom out and look at the narrative and figure out, is the narrative actually as clear as I think it is? Are we actually leading by narrative? Because otherwise, we end up getting either too rigid, or the people don't buy in. And so people don't make their own actions in accordance with what we're trying to do. And so they end up making it more difficult. There's a lot of reasons that the narrative is important, and that is how Batman ends up succeeding. He ends up seeing a larger narrative of salvation for Gotham, and because of that, he has this vision that he's going to sacrifice, he's going to do the dirty work, he's going to have to turn this machine on and then have Lucius turn it back off. And then in the end, he's going to take the blame for the death of Harvey Dent so that they can keep the prisoners in jail and keep the hope of the people alive.